the root of transformation starts with people, right? You really have to ground and base everything on the people within the organization, the people that are going to drive the change. How do you support them? How do you understand what's important to them? And that's where true transformation. And then, part of that transformation is not to overcomplicate it, but how do we make it simple, adoptable, repeatable? There's all kinds of tools, process. We talk tools, process, performance, drum beats, all this stuff. But at the end of the day, it's how do we bring people through the journey?
Thanks so much for joining another edition of The Never Ending Climb for a Stronger Supply Chain and Procurement. Today, I have the great pleasure of being joined by Jeff Bever. And Jeff, for those of you that don't know him, he is passionate about people and the planet and fostering this enterprise mindset to bring value, drive positive change. Jeff, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, Sean, thanks for having me. It's really great to be with you and looking forward to the conversation.
Thanks. I'm curious. I love hearing from people. How did you get into procurement?
I would say that by happenstance. So, I didn't, I didn't set out to have a career in procurement. My background was in, agriculture. I started as a merchant. I thought, I wanted to be a trader and working in agriculture. That was kind of all that I really knew. And when I kind of got into this field, everything just kind of fell into place by really chasing experiences versus chasing a job or a role.
That's such a great way to look at it, because when you chase the experience, we learn so much more, don't we?
Absolutely. I think for me, it's still about experiences. And when I try to share any type of wisdom or anything with people, I always tell them to think about what are the experiences you need to accomplish the outcomes that you desire, whether it be personally or professionally, because that's what will prepare you for the next role.
There's a rounding out of sorts. When people bring that kind of curiosity and humility into life, there's kind of a rounding out of the experience and the perspective too, because it's very difficult to cultivate that perspective, to look at things or new things that come up with the right perspective and context don't feel so new anymore. They feel like a similar pattern that you can pattern match and then handle elegantly, where other people that have only focused on one thing, it can feel catastrophic.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Our career, we can't look at it as linear, right? There's peaks and valleys in our career, just like life. So, you try to take the good with the bad and just grow from each one of them.
There's something really, really tremendous about that, because as you see more peaks and valleys, each peak and valley creates conditions where those next changes, those next peaks and valleys become, all right, we get to deal with this. Here we go, right? And now that creates an opportunity to look back across some of those peaks and valleys and changes. What are some of the ones that stand out to you the most in terms of through supply chain procurement over your career?
I think it can be everything from the geopolitical environment to leadership changes to personal changes, where we are in our families or lives and different things. And so, at different times, we have different needs, whether that's personally, professionally. If we look back, 2008 was a challenging year from a business perspective, from a geopolitical perspective in the category. So today I'm, I work within the confections category. I'm part of Lindt Springly, Russell Stover chocolates. And so, over the last 18 months, we've been fighting this very volatile market. And so, those are challenging times with anything. And then for me, we took a lot of different opportunities for growth. So you talk about or think about experiences, and we've had on personal levels, like relocating for roles. So to take jobs. And so then you're not only dealing with the professional change to try to learn and grow and stretch yourself, but then you're trying to make sure that the family is settled and happy and being successful. And so that's where, those peaks and valleys, nothing is, always just kind of straight and the waters are always calm. And I think it's really around resiliency and adaptability. And that's what really accelerates our development and growth and learning and all that comes along with it. And I think that's really where, for myself, I started to think about, all these roles, positions, and different pieces are all intertwined and connected, right? And so I know that you and I had talked a little bit about just the function and, how is it changing? How has it changed and different things? And, one of the things I'm really passionate about is this enterprise mindset of what is procurement and sourcing, less as a function and really as an integral part of the business. And I think it's that having that commercial mindset and those different experiences along the way changed my perception, my thoughts, the way that I look at the role and the function, because I've had roles in operations, I've had roles across all the different categories, whether it was directs, indirects, A&CP, IT, factory general services, all of those different things. And I think they've all helped to shape kind of that mindset.
There's something tremendous about staying curious and bringing that thirst for understanding to whatever the situation is. And you've used the term commercial mindset a few times.
Yeah.
That's something that I think there's quite a few people that have traditionally been in procurement where they might think of maybe a narrower view of what commercial means. And there's transformation and how people look at transforming. One of the things that really stands out for me, Jeff, is the way when I hear you describe that, there's something more powerful than just automating the way that we used to do it or just doing more of the thing that worked, but rather, kind of eye on the bigger picture and making sure that we step back to understand what really matters. Can you share a little bit more about what that way that you look at transformation is? Because there's harder lessons in there, and commercial is one ingredient, and I want to save the enterprise mindset to come back to that if we can.
From transformation, the root of transformation starts with people, right? You really have to ground and base everything on the people within the organization, the people that are going to drive the change. How do you support them? How do you understand what's important to them? And that's where true transformation. And then, part of that transformation is not to overcomplicate it, but how do we make it simple, adoptable, repeatable? There's all kinds of tools, process. We talk tools, process, performance, drum beats, all this stuff. But at the end of the day, it's how do we bring people through the journey and then create opportunities for, what I call a respite or, a little bit of a break, catch your wind, right? And so transformation, doesn't always happen consistently across the timeline. That there may be breaks in that timeline as we transform to reevaluate and say, okay, do we have the right skills? Do we have the right capabilities? Are we giving the right support to our people? How do we go back and educate people? Are we still focused on the right things? And then, the tools and, all the cool gadgets and that kind of stuff, accelerate it. If we don't have the right mindset and we haven't set kind of a clear direction and supported our people through the change, then for me, I'm not sure that any transformation is successful.
It's the landed adoption, isn't it? Right?
Yeah.
A new process or a new tool that sits on the shelf in the binder or in the SharePoint folder doesn't do much good. It's just transformed how something's parked.
Yeah.
It's pretty important to make sure that the landed adoption is really where the unlock happens.
It's always around you talk about strategy and execution, right? People always go this piece around strategy and execution, and one of the first questions that you always ask yourself, or at least I always ask myself, is where's execution breaking down, and why, right? Is it because we weren't communicating effectively? Did we not bring people along? Did we not really set to solve the right problem? Right. And so I think
it's a really, really powerful opportunity to remember that no matter how much the marketing team wants to stick the AI label on anything, it's doing nobody any good if it's not helping the people in the first place. So many things in life, they
Yeah.
start and end with people. It doesn't matter how much you want to, you stick the AI label on whatever it is. I keep waiting to see AI labels on juice packs in the supermarket to see if they help sell things better, but that's another story. When I think about the look back on our careers, I'm always curious, what do leaders wish they knew earlier? And what would you share with yourself maybe 10 years ago, 20 years ago? What would you want a person that you're mentoring that's maybe 10, 20 years behind you in their career? What would you really want them to know?
I think what I want them to know is that it's okay to be uncomfortable. And if you're not
Mm,
uncomfortable, you're not growing, right? I
yeah.
think we get in and we think that we have to master something before we move on. So I think a lot of young people also take on more. They feel overwhelmed or overloaded, right? And they somewhat kind of artificially burn themselves out because they believe that that's what's going to launch their career, right? And I think how they build the longevity of a career and keep developing is curiosity, right? Learning new things, taking opportunities to stretch themselves. I take myself, like I said, I've fallen into a lot of different things and had a lot of great mentors and people give me opportunities, but I've also stepped up and tried to make sure that I was prepared, so that when the opportunity came, I took that, right? So my career, I started, like I said, in grain and merchandising and calling on, farmers and producers, and got the opportunity to work at the Board of Trade for a short amount of time, and then took those price risk management strategies into a whole different field, right? Went into construction and, how to use price risk management to manage copper and lumber and concrete and all kinds of things. And then, in one of those troughs, if you will, found myself, because of economic conditions and what is the next role or opportunity for me, going back into more of a CPG on the buy side, right? And really that got me into this indirect sourcing and procurement space where I got my first experience into global sourcing and marketing, sales, R&D, and working with those individuals. And then it always changing and evolving. And if I took a very linear where I just said, hey, I'm going to do direct commodities, or I just want to do indirect sourcing and all of that, I wouldn't have had the career or the opportunity that I've had today. And none of those were comfortable, right, when you make those changes. But there was always this curiosity about, well, how do they do that, and how does that matter? And yeah, that sounds fun, type mentality piece out there. And so, you go from a supply side mindset to this, that's where I say, like, this commercial mindset or the enterprise mindset of when you get some of those experiences and exposures across the business, you start to realize that it's not about, our job as procurement or sourcing is really, it's not about savings, right? It's really encompasses a lot of different things. It's how do we contribute to the broader goals of the organization, whether that could be through, enabling cash, reducing inventories, minimizing destructions or obsolescence. It's around, you know, transportation or lead times, right? It's the EBITDA conversation. And then I think as young people start to mature in their career and things, one of the best things that they can do is not get caught up in a function from a vocabulary or talking about the function, but really talking about the business, because the reality is most of the people within this profession and function have a broader business lens or view than a lot of the people that businesses would term commercial, right? So a lot of business term commercial is just a sales or a marketing view, but they don't understand the impact to our COGS. They don't understand the impacts on supply chain, some of the things that their competitors, the people that they're facing off every day to gain shelf space or presence within a retailer or online or any of that. And so that's where that commercial mindset comes, is we are in the best position possible from any function or from any group within an organization to bring perspective of what is going on in the environment around us. I just think that we don't recognize that at times. And so that's that shift where you have to get out of this, silo functional piece and say, okay, where can I bring value to the business, and start talking to them in their language. We know what we're talking about from our language, but we need to go further and talk about things in the business language.
Yeah, that communication, right? If you're talking to somebody in a scenario where they have nothing to sell if you can't procure it, either through direct or commodities, the academics of whether you saved a point or two or a percent or two are really lost in the rounding if we didn't actually have the fundamental product to sell in the first place. And I think that picture of the stronger supply chain over-indexing on savings is really over-indexing on, I'll call it a derivative metric, right? And one that's pretty up for argument too, of how much did we really save, right? Well, there was inflation, and then there was this other factor, and then we negotiated this, and the scope changed, and well, what was the price before and after? Well, that's an apples to oranges conversation. So we can academically debate how much savings we really created there, but we could also spend those 4 hours doing some other things. It's a remarkable trade-off of the anecdotes, the stories of here are examples of how we create value, we leave value behind, without agonizing over the parts that maybe no one's going to remember.
Staying on this question of helping people earlier in their career, I think, a lot of early career people focus on the process or the tools and the systems, and you always hear resistance or procurement gets, a little bit of a negative connotation because they believe that we slow things down. And part of our job is we do manage risk. I always tell people early on in their career, this isn't a department of no, right? This is our responsibility is to help to manage risk. We're here to accelerate, right? And to help the business achieve what they need to. It's our role to figure out how do we work within the processes that don't slow the business down, right? Because we have to have the controls, but we're the experts in that kind of stuff. So we're the perfect people to help them make sure that we're getting the right controls in place, but at the same time, helping them move at speed and pace and accomplish the things. So, first you have to seek to understand and just meet the business where they are.
There's something wonderful about the idea too of the different elements of expertise across the business, right? One of my favorite examples is that engineer over there knows exactly how to design the machine and the right parts to get and how it's going to work together, but their expertise is not necessarily in some of the commercial and contracting risk and supply chain risk. And so you put those two things together and we start to create the conditions of, the 1 + 1 = 3 because of the amplification of those two things coming through and the reliability, the predictability, the stability that can create towards the right objectives. And it's the part that kept coming to mind as you were describing what you would share earlier is these echoes in my head of conversations with people where they've described situations of earlier in their career, they thought the answer was get the product in faster. But what they really needed to do is to get it in more reliably and with less noise. And so they moved from fighting fires to get things hot rushed to, hey, let's set things up so it all just arrives when it's supposed to, smoothly, ratably, right? You enter that flow state. The transition, some people can make that from firefighter to, I'll call it the optimizing flow. Yeah. And some people live for the fires. And that shift is really, really powerful. The adrenaline junkie tends to really appreciate fighting fires, and it can feel really boring to manage flow. But that's actually a good thing. Yeah. Let's come to maybe one quick thing. You emphasized that curiosity and that openness to new experiences and how that comes through. And I just wanted to thank you for emphasizing that because I think there are so many things that become possible through curiosity. And it's so powerful in so many places, not least of which some of the higher pressure conversations that procurement supply chain can get into, or even, conversations in our personal lives, like my teenage son, where when I maintain curiosity in my conversations with him, the outcomes are tremendously better. than the alternatives. And I tend to think about the same is true for so many staff and so many other departments. And the why, if somebody in another team starts feeling like you're the department of no, then when we get curious about what is it about, our interaction that's making you feel that way, it can be very disarming. And it can really open up to some of the other enterprise risk and how do we create the flow? How do we optimize towards? So I want to thank you for emphasizing the curiosity because when applied well, it's such a superpower. I'd love to talk more about, and Jeff, can you tell us more about the enterprise mindset? Because I love the term and it feels really powerful.
All of the talk as we were going through transformation. So I had the fortunate circumstance to be part of a couple different transformational journeys. First with Colgate Palmolive as they centralized their sourcing and procurement organization, but then also with the Mars organization, and then even most recent of what we're doing here at Russell Stover. And this enterprise mindset started to take hold, like I said, many years ago. And just for me, is core to, I think, how to actually lead and manage transformation and how to bring continued relevancy of procurement and sourcing to the business, especially in, you said, if I can put a sticker of AI on it, will everybody take it? And I think, as technology and everything continues to change and our profession continues to evolve because of technology and different things, the enterprise mindset is, I think, core to its success. And what the enterprise mindset is you really have to not think of it as a function, right? You can't think of procurement just as a function or a siloed piece. And this is where, I said earlier, mentioned earlier, it's the broad business perspective. And it's looking at how the behaviors and things that we are doing and how we support the broader business, whether it's IT, marketing and sales, supply chain, because we set where we set, amongst the different operators of our business, we gain a perspective that no one else within the organization has, because we get to understand what's going on in our supply chain, what's happening in our growth engine. So the new innovation, new product development, we get to engage with the marketplace, right? I mean, that's part of our role. And one of the advantages we have is we're talking to other people that have different experiences and exposures and different expertise and all of that. And so when we can bring that back into our business and share that back into our business, that's the enterprise mindset, because it's really connecting the dots. So if you're someone who enjoys puzzles, or you enjoy, word search and different things, it's almost like you're connecting all of these pieces, and that's the real value, right? Especially as technology continues to accelerate, we know that the things where, the traditional function of this role, a lot of it was surfacing, insights, whether it was in data or patterns or different things. Well, now that stuff can be done almost instantaneously. And so for us, this is where, you mentioned the soft skills and, how people talk to each other and the relatability and all that. That's where it becomes more important, because it's really about taking all of these things that we now have available at speed or at pace, and this is where we shine, right? And it's really about helping people to make better and clearer decisions, whether it's our decision or not. It just depends on the category and what our role is within the organization. We can at least be the thought partner to help with better outcomes from for the business, because at the end of the day, we're all on the same team. We all are working to make sure that the business is successful and profitable, and that we're able to take care of, the organization and our, sourcing partners, or our external partners, and then our own families and things, right? And so that's really the basis of the enterprise mindset, is you have to think bigger. You have to think broader. You always tell people, or what I see, we put out job descriptions, we work with our HR and all this. And one of the things that they always put in there is think like an owner, think all of these different things. And really, the enterprise mindset is that, because, really you're taking ownership of not only a function, but the entire business and the outcome of the business.
Yeah. And depending on where you sit in that organization, you're naturally responsible and accountable for, a small part or a big part, but own that part and make it amazing.
Yeah, you don't have to be an executive or a vice president or a senior manager or people leader. It's really you're choosing to take the mindset of the work that you're doing is adding value across the business, right? And we all play a role in
Yeah.
that.
One of the things that I don't often get to talk too much about, Jeff, but this behind me is our values tree, and it's the roots of our company. And one of them really gets into understand how you're making a difference, right? And understand why it matters. And that's one of those really critical roots in understanding and digging in and creating the right ingredients, the right perspective, and applying the right curiosity to bring the right outcomes forward and not rule things out as impossible because maybe something that used to be true is not serving us anymore, right? And those types of questions that can be really, really powerful. Jeff, I know we're running a little bit out of time today. Are there some closing thoughts of some things that you would really want to leave with a community that you know would serve them?
For me, I live by three things, and these were things that were bestowed upon me and for me to pay it forward. And this is how I try to lead. And the credit I give is to one of my mentors, Krista Page, right? So this has probably been the most influential mentor for me in my career. And so I've worked for Krista several times, consider her really a thought leader kind of in this space. But it's, what she always instilled was be curious, be bold, and be kind. And I
Oh, that is
think,
such a great combo.
and so for me, I try to live by that. I try to continue to pass that down because I think all of those resonate, right? So, we've talked a lot about curiousness, and to be curious, there's times when you have to be bold, right? And it's really about,
Yeah.
challenging these different mindsets. And I think that's what helped me to start to reflect and think about this enterprise mindset, right? And become a champion of the enterprise mindset. And the kindness piece, as she would always say, like the kindness isn't weakness, right? Kindness is the empathy piece. So we talk a lot about empathy. So this could easily be curious, be bold, and have empathy or whatever. But I think the kindness really resonates because in a time or an environment where we work with deadlines, we work across a lot of different pressures. The kindness helps us to meet people where they are, to understand that, hey, we all have good days, we all have bad days. We're here to work together, and together we can really accomplish what we need to. And so I think for me, if I leave the audience or the group with that piece, those are the three things that I would always index for people on.
That is words to live by, Jeff. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate you taking some time to share your wisdom with us and your story. And for all of you watching, this has been another edition of The Never Ending Climb for a Stronger Supply Chain and Procurement. We'll see you next week.